Good afternoon. Welcome. Welcome to the International Peace Institute and to today's policy forum, Leading for Peace, Voices from the Field. I'm Youssef Mahmoud, Senior Advisor here at IPI, and we are honored today to host Professor Abdoulaye Bathily, Special Advisor of the UN Secretary General to Madagascar. This policy forum was designed to provide us with an opportunity to reflect on recent developments in the Indian Ocean country and to try to understand the conditions that have supported its successful journey through multiple political crises. For many people, Madagascar first came on the radar following an unconstitutional change of government a decade ago. I'm sure that Professor Bathily will give an insightful reflection on those developments and how the international political mediation helped set the stage for where we are today. The 2011 elections represented a watershed moment for the country, where international and bilateral partners helped create a conducive political environment and directly supported the National Election Commission. This is the context in which the UN Secretary General appointed Professor Bathily, and I'm sure he will help us understand how the constellation of international actors worked to support Madagascar. In my view, Madagascar's experiences over the past decade epitomize many of the contemporary dynamics we collectively face inherent towards national efforts in promoting sustainable peace. One, sustaining political engagement and international attention over long time periods. Two, navigating international cooperation across crisis management and structural conflict prevention. And three, supporting countries through democratic transitions and ensuring that national electoral cycles remain moments of peace consolidation and not a source of tension. Again, I'm confident Professor Bathily will provide insightful and valuable reflections on these issues and more. You have Professor Bathily's bio before you. Let me just say a few words by way of introduction. Professor Bathily was appointed by the Secretary General as his special advisor on Madagascar on April 27 of last year. He has previously served as Special Representative of the Secretary General for the United Nations Office for Central Africa, and before that, Deputy Special Representative of the Secretary General for the United Nations Peacekeeping Mission in Mali, MINUSMA. A Senegalese national, Mr. Bathily has held senior positions in his national government, including as a parliamentarian and a senior minister for the national presidency. For more than 30 years, Mr. Bathily has taught history at the University Sheikh Anta Diop in Dakar, so you understand why I'm calling him Professor rather than His Excellency or Mr. So with those few words, I'd like you, please, to ask Ambassador. I'm calling him Ambassador now, I'm changing your title. Come and join me, please. So Ambassador, I like the word ambassador, will share with us a few reflections, and after that we will open the floor for questions and answers. And if I suspect or witness certain timidity, I will start with my own questions. Professor Bathily, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Brother Mahmoud. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure for me to introduce this conversation on Madagascar, as he mentioned it. I don't want to dwell on the history of Madagascar. You all know, for the last 3 decades, Madagascar has been considered as one of the most unstable countries in Africa. Maybe second to Central African Republic, CAR. Since 1976, up until last January, coups, counter-coups, civil strife, popular uprisings have been the milestones of Madagascar political history. It is the first time last July that an elected president succeeds to an incumbent since independence. This tells, in a nutshell, the story of Madagascar. Since President Tsiranan, who has led the country to independence and toppled by popular uprising and then military takeover in 76, ever since, not one president has completed his mission along constitutional line. Well, this is a sad story because it has labeled Madagascar as one of the most backward countries on the continent on account of the political instability, but also economic stagnation, the disruption of social fabric, a country deeply divided politically, socially, and all the economic indicators point to the fact that Madagascar has one of the poorest records in terms of economic achievement. The level of poverty is rarely seen elsewhere, even on the basis of African standards. And of course, the last crisis followed the 29 crisis when President Rajoelina, who is now the elected president, through a popular uprising with military intervention, ousted the then President Ravalomanan, who himself has toppled Didier Ratsirek in 2002 through popular uprising. In 2002, I was a member of the contact group of the African Union for Madagascar. In April 2018, as Mahmoud mentioned, the Secretary General appointed me as his special advisor for Madagascar to try with the other stakeholders, both from the international community and the national stakeholders, to diffuse the tensions, to stabilize the situation and allow Madagascar to hold free, fair elections along constitutional rules. This was not an easy task, as you may imagine, because after 3 decades of conflicts, mistrust among actors, national actors, but also divided international community, because this is one of the issues. Because the Madagascar crisis is a crisis of governance nationally, mistrust among national stakeholders, but also divide interest among international partners of Madagascar. I think this is an aspect which is very important to note. So, what did we do from May, when I visited first Madagascar? I visited Madagascar over the last years 5 times, 5 missions. For me, it was important to have a unified position of the international community, to mediate among the mediators themselves, first of all. I think this is very, very important. Crises, when they occur in Africa, usually you have conflicting interests among international stakeholders who have their own interests. And they have proxies or partners or friends, we may call them differently, in the country. So we have to tell them that it is important for the sake of this country, for the interests of the people of the country, that all international partners speak with one voice to allow that country to survive, to overcome its crisis, to be allowed to enter into the path of development. So we have to go around all the members through the embassies or representatives who are on the ground, who have influence on different actors, national actors. Within the framework of what we call le Groupe International de Contact sur Madagascar, to talk to all of them, not only formally through meetings, but also individually, to go to them, to talk to them, to share views with them, but also, more importantly, to try to convince them that it is in their own strategic interest and the interest of the people of Madagascar for that country to have peace. So we have engaged all of those on the ground, first of all. And of course, we have also to engage the regional actors, the African Union, through their High Representative, Minister Lamamra, and also the SADC, the sub-regional organization, through their special envoy, President Chissano of Mozambique, the former president of Mozambique. But also the representative of the Francophonie, the representative of the Indian Ocean Commission. So we have to hold bilateral talks with each of these representatives, but also to get them collectively, instead of each of us going around in motorcades from one stakeholder to the other differently. We said it is important for all of us to come together, to speak with one voice to all the stakeholders so that we can see that we have a common message, a united view. So this took us some days, and finally we settled for this way of doing things instead of separate meetings and discussions, and the national stakeholders taking these differences of opinion or perceived difference of opinion to continue their fight, their struggle among themselves. So I think this is extremely important for a political crisis in African countries or elsewhere, to have a united voice of the international community, to convince international partners to look for the interests of the country concerned, the interests of the people concerned, rather than their foreign national interests. So I think this is important. Secondly, the national stakeholders in Madagascar, through 3 decades of political crisis, mistrust among those actors, we have to make effort to convince them to take their responsibility before their people at this point in time in history. It's their duty, their responsibility going around all the stakeholders at their house, their offices, discussing them with them one by one, face to face, one-to-one discussion, and sometimes collectively also bringing them together. And we, as common international partners, in that case, myself, Lamamra, and President Shisano, confronting them with their responsibility. And this we have done while demonstrations were going on in the streets. Because from April 21st, the opposition, through their members of parliament, has staged demonstration against the decision of the president to bring new laws amending the electoral code. À la place du 13 Mai, demonstrations were ongoing. Of course, we have hundreds of people taking to the streets, demonstrating, asking the president to resign and to set up a transition government. They lodged their complaint to the High Constitutional Court. So the country was at standstill, the economy was a standstill. We were in a political impasse. So we have also to take into account those demonstrators on the street, because they were chauffés à blanc. They would not settle for anything but the resignation of the president. And our common position was that we would not accept an unconstitutional change of government. We have to accept a settlement whereby the rule of law will prevail, the constitution will prevail, and on the basis of that, any accommodation politically can be arrived at by national actors. I myself had a discussion with the MPs, the dissenting MPs who were conducting the demonstrations. I had to talk to them for hours, and they were adamant to their position. But we have really to take. Eventually, I must say that some institutions in the country and their members and leaders played an important role in this, in the final settlement of the situation. Among those institutions is we can cite la Haute Cour constitutionnelle, the High Constitutional Court. They played an important role in interpreting the Constitution, but also looking at the interests of the country. For the first time, they have been able to take decisions which led to the upholding of the Constitution on the one hand, and inciting the political leaders to come to a political agreement, which is very important. They resisted the pressure both from the government and the opposition and the demonstrations in the street. So the way the high juridical institution in the country work is important. Their degree of independence, neutrality, and their sense of responsibility can play an important role in resolving a crisis in the country. Oftentimes, what we see is that there is no separation of power. There is no counterweight. The Constitutional Court and other judicial houses play into the hands of the government, the incumbent government usually, through different means, political pressure, but also corruption. Corruption of judges is a key issue in most countries these days, and is an indication of the level of the democratic transition in the country. So the High Constitutional Court, we discussed with them without putting pressure on them, but we told them that they have to play a neutral role. And they did that. And thanks to that, we were able also to operate in a better environment. The National Electoral Commission, Independent National Electoral Commission, also did a professional work, independent from the government, from the pressure also of the opposition. And the United Nations have played an important role in this, because the national resident coordinator and its team and her team has played an important role in getting the funds through different donors, assisting technically the National Electoral Commission, which by the backing of the international community, both financially, technically, but also politically, morally supported by this, we have been able to resist the pressure from national actors, which could have derailed the whole electoral process. So their neutrality also played an important part in the process of the solution to the crisis. But also, as we were mediating among national actors, with the discussion we have with all of them, they finally settled with us to the fact that they have really, for this particular point in time in the history of their country, to play a positive role. We put them in corner. Because we have, in Madagascar, I think the percentage of former minister, former prime minister, former president is so high. So we said, you are all responsible, both from the opposition and the governing party. All you have been presidents, and you are all responsible of this crisis. Don't point the figure to only one person. History will record once more, but you have failed your country. So we put political and moral pressure on them. So try to find a consensus to get out of this crisis. Whatever we international community, we cannot do your job at your place. We need you to find a common position. Through several discussions, day and night, one-to-one, but also collectively, we have seen a tilt in their position. Each of them, finally, I must say, accepted to play a positive role. The incumbent President Eri Rajamampian, accepted to discuss, to enter into a political agreement whereby a consensus government will be formed towards the election, so that the government alone would not organize the elections, but a consensus government will create a favorable environment for the elections to be conducted. So he accepted that. His main contenders, because there was the former President Ravalomanan and the former President Rajoelina, also accepted the principle of going into a consensus government. So they exchanged notes. We have sometimes played a role as intermediary for them to pass, because they wouldn't talk to each other directly. So we have to go around them. This is the paper. He said that. You said that. Finally, they settled for that. And this is why a consensus government was formed with a neutral prime minister. And on this basis, the crisis was so much, to a certain extent, settled at certain level. More importantly, the Constitution of Madagascar, which is something unique in Africa or elsewhere, disposes that 60 days before the elections, the incumbent president should resign, and the president of the Senate will be the interim president till the election of the new president. As you know, this is a recurrent issue in Africa. The incumbent organize the elections, have all the resources of the government, the police, the gendarmerie, the army, and of course the corruption mechanisms, and they 90% times they win. And the incumbent win. Very rarely the incumbent doesn't win in Africa when you look at the records of the elections in our country. And it was not easy for the president to abide by this disposition of the constitution. It was not easy because his partisans said, no, we have given away, we have now a new government, which we lost everything now. The majority of the ministers, the prime ministers, are not from our party, are not from outside, and now they said you will resign. Sure, we will lose in the end. Of course, basing on the history of Madagascar, the president could have taken that position, and he could have, refused to resign. And of course, the crisis will continue. Mm-hmm. But he did it in September, 60 days before. And the president of the Senate became interim president. So each of them have played their role. There is also the role of some civil society organization, which really put pressure, moral pressure, on the stakeholders to take their responsibility before their nation. Some religious groups, one institution called le Conseil Malgache de Réconciliation Nationale also played their part. So, the combination of the united position of the international community and the sense of responsibility by national institutions through their members, but also what I may call un sursaut de conscience of the national actors has brought together different ingredients which brought us to free, fair elections. No one of the candidates got elected first round. The incumbent was defeated. He hardly had 12% first round. His two opponents, Ravalomanan and Rajoelina, went second round. And again, for the second round, we have to do the same kind of, because the two were enemies, because Rajoelina toppled Ravalomanan in 2009. So it was not easy for them. Both of them, it was a matter of life and death to accept to be defeated second round, because it would be considered as a vindication of what has happened 10 years before. However, we have again to mediate to make them hold their responsibility. So this is why, finally, Madagascar was able to have free, fair, and elections, peaceful elections, and at the inauguration, all the presidents, the ancient president came, former president came to the inauguration of Rajoelina, and there was a new national mood to say Madagascar has to make history, has to open a new page in its political and maybe social and economic history. Now, on 27th of May this year, they are going for the legislative elections. Hopefully, these elections will go well. There are some indication to that. There is only one problem now we have, is that 4 days ago, the president decided to hold a referendum the same day as the legislative. But he has not yet produced the text of this referendum, which provision of the Constitution should be amended to that effect. So there is a debate over the last 2 days after the Easter holidays. So we have again to talk to all the stakeholders to keep the national mood of dialogue, of consensus, so that Madagascar will open in a way, definitely, a new page in their own history. So this is why it is mediation is a complex terrain. It needs a lot of patience, understanding, and a sense of duty on the part of all stakeholders from within and from without. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Join me, please. If you ever were looking for a textbook of how to be a special envoy, you've heard it. This is really a consummate account of the art and craft of mediation. And it brings a lot of memory. So he mentioned 3 important strategies that you don't usually see. You see a lot of activity, but you don't see the strategy behind this madness. It's 3-pronged, basically. The first one, make sure that all the outside actors speak from the same hymn book. Regional, sub-regional, international, individual, etc. Second, identify which national resilient peace institutions you can rely on to use it as a leverage to speak logic to the internal actors. And he has mentioned at least 4 of them. And I am really pleased to hear about this constitution, that the constitution is a reference. And the third one, which is the hardest, is talking to the parties. Parties that do not speak to each other, but they listen to each other through you. And I'm just wondering, and this is my quick question to you, is it easier to help the parties come to a consensus than mediating among mediators? I'm just curious in this particular case and in general.
Well, at times it was easier that way to mediate among mediators, but at times also it's at different periods of the mediation.
Yeah.
There is no kind of straightforward, answer. On
Answer.
that. Yeah.
And I was happy.
You have to look at the dynamic and the psychology of both actors.
And I was a little bit disappointed at the end of your presentation. I was looking for a story that I can package with happy ribbons, and all of a sudden you tell me that there is other tricks incumbents have in their trick bags, and if they couldn't change the constitution, maybe the referendum. So, ladies and gentlemen, watch this site. So keep an eye on Madagascar. So I'd like now to open the floor for those who would like to take it. There's the gentleman there, and then the gentleman in the middle, and then here. I have 3 gentlemen, so I hope I can change the gender in a minute. Go ahead,
thank
please.
you, Excellency, for the very good presentation.
A little bit closer.
I would like to know.
Could you tell us who would I, please?
Well, I'm Abraham Joseph. I have also been did some work on Madagascar in the 1990s with Jeffrey Sachs for the African Millennium Village over there.
Great.
In Sambaina. And I've been with the UN for about 30 years, and also was a special advisor to the Foreign Minister of East Timor, and also was on with the UN for about 30 years.
Thank you.
On developmental issues. Well, I must say that how will we sustain the peace that has been brought out? And there's a big responsibility for the international community, especially the UN system and bilaterals and multilaterals. There is need for actually for building the human and institutional capacities. When we take East Timor, for example, after the conflict.
So your question is, in light of all these efforts and these positive results, how to sustain it?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's
An
right.
institution possibly was one way.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Who's the next? Yes, sir.
Thank you. My name is Amadou Diallo, working for the Policy and Mediation Division of the Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs. Thank you very much for your presentation. Actually, it gives us hope that preventive diplomacy works. And I know my good friend, Youssef Mahmoud, has been very vocal against the securitization of political and peace processes, calling for the primacy of politics. So that gives us hope that the primacy of politics is actually working to some extent. So my question was that, what were some of the challenges that you face bringing together the regional and sub-regional actors in these mediation processes? Because as you know, the UN, we always say we should work with regional actors, but what are the downsides of it? Thank you.
Thank you. And then the gentleman there, and then you.
Hi, Thomas Barker with the DPPA, working in electoral assistance. I really liked what you talked about with national actors taking responsibility and sometimes the lack of political will when it comes to elections. I was wondering, what do you think international actors like the UN can do better to coordinate with parties and ensure there's a political will to have a fair and credible election?
Thank you. John?
John Hirsch with IPI. First of all, Ambassador Bathily, thank you very, very much for your remarks. I don't want to ask you about Madagascar. You have a lot of broad experience. What is the difference in your mind between the countries that are doing well without being on the agenda of the UN, like with Namibia and Botswana, to give you 2 concrete examples? They're not on the agenda of the UN, and they're doing quite well. What is the difference between those countries and others you might think of, and the countries that have recurring problems such as CAR and Mali, and up to this point, Madagascar? What's your thought on what makes the difference?
Thank you. Une autre question? The gentleman over there. And
Thank you so much. My name is Uzodima. I'm a student from Teachers College, Columbia University. My question is, what are the actionable steps Madagascar is taking to ensure that those that mess up the elections or those that are politically corrupt in the system through the elections are punished so as to serve as a deterrent to others. Because until the offenders are punished, the appetite to commit same offenses will keep replicating itself. So what actionable steps are the government taking to tame those tired of corruption and also, like he said, empower the instruments of government so that politicians do not use the instruments of government to overheat the polity and oppress the opposition?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we'll take these gender-blind questions from the audience, and then I'll come back to you in case others would like to. The floor is yours. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I think most countries, all the countries, are at this historical point in time in a period of democratic transition. There are ups and downs in all the countries, depending on the particular case you have in mind. I think it is important to build institutions, but institutions are incarnated by people, individuals, who, in my opinion, has to demonstrate a democratic culture, which is not often the case. For example, at this point in time, in the DPA is trying to get together all the stakeholders of the UN system to have a sort of compact strategic approach for Madagascar, both at the economic level, at political level, social level, to favor national reconciliation. So that all the agencies of the UN country team would come together and work together through programs and projects with national actors, which is very important at this, because this will stabilize, sustain the gains, because all doesn't end with free and fair elections and a new president. But what we may call les vieux démons may re-emerge. Interests of different groups, different individuals may re-emerge, corruption, etc. So this is why I think it is important, as you said, but we really help strengthen national institutions, but also through national reconciliation process to root the democratic culture in society. Because Madagascar is divided. The level of poverty is appalling. Differences between the highlands and the coast, north and south, at different levels, the level of unemployment, etc. For instance, they have a lot of security issues. Madagascar has no border, physical border with any country, because it's an island. But still, you have very serious security problems. Kidnapping, a lot of abduction of individuals for material gains. But also the phenomenon of the Dalo, those who take how do you call it, les ébus, So all these are indicator of the instability of society, the divisions in society. So it's a long work to be done. I agree. The institutions have to be built through individuals, but reconciled individuals. What kind of challenges we have? We have sub-regional, regional actors, etc. Of course, this is a very important question because in the past, African Union has its own way of doing things. The UN has its own way of doing things. SADC has its own, and sometimes each of them, at a certain point, did not come to terms. And I think this has helped prolonging the crisis at one point. But this point in time, thanks to what we have been able to do together, maybe sometimes also some personal ingredients has played. Because some of the main actors internationally, we know each other, we knew each other for a long time. I've worked and known and worked with La Mamra for years. I called him mon petit frère, mon grand frère. I have known President Chissano since the guerrilla days throughout. So those personal contacts and relations have eased also the tensions between our organization. Finally, we didn't recognize ourselves as rival in this to try to say, I am the only one who, each one coming with his flag. But we come together, we said, look, we have to do something to save that country. Because if we succeed, it will be the success of this country,
exactly.
first of all. And I think this also can play an important role. Right? And of course, we national actors also, the psychology is important. How to deal with every individual, his own history, his ambition, because you cannot bring somebody into an agreement without taking into account his own ambition. But you have to become sort of to be yourself an educator somehow when talking to them. I remember talking to President Rajolina. I said, well, you are a young man, 40 years. You have the chance to serve your country, 5 years term, through a military coup or what some call through a popular uprising. Things are not settled. Now you have the opportunity to serve your country peacefully. So come to a compromise. If you are sure you can win, come to a compromise. To Ravalomanan said, well, you are a successful businessman, but you know, your business cannot be successful, thrive in that country when everything is in havoc. You have seen that in 2000, when you toppled Didier Ratsirak, you were president, and you see where it led you. You have been toppled by another one. So you have to engage a kind of conversation with them, you know, and finally they settle for something. They settle for something. So there is a kind of education mechanism, psychology, reading the psychology of the people you deal with, etc. You see? We have, well, there are countries which stand as example in terms of their democratic records on the continent. Botswana, and as you mentioned. And I think all in all, through my own experience as a politician, I think politician has to look at their own ambition and look at the ambition of the country. If you have a stand whereby you think, if I am not president, the country should go to fire. Some politicians think that their ambition are everything. They have to win an election at all costs. They are the only person fit to lead a country, which is an over-ambition, which is psychologically unacceptable. I used to tell, well, when there are, in a country, where you have the chance to become a president for 5 years, 10 years, out of a population of 20 million or so, or even sometime more, you must say you are lucky, because it doesn't mean you are more intelligent than all the 20 million other people. If you had that chance, give a chance to others to show their competence. So I think we have to reinvent politics in Africa, to root what I call a democratic culture, the sense of humility
And service.
and service
Yeah.
to the country. And wherever this exists, there is a chance that you have a democratic system which persists, which can be sustained. But unfortunately, this is not the case. Sometimes, in many countries, sometimes you have gains which are made, but after some time, of course, the country may relapse into chaos again. This is how history works. But I think I'm personally optimistic that things will improve in the long run. Well, I think this.
Yeah.
In
Thank you very much. Lady here, please.
Thank you so much. My name is Annalena Schluchter from the Peace Building Support Office, the Peace Building Fund. I would like to come back to reconciliation. You brought it up, the reconciliation between individuals, a concept which, as I understand, is contentious in Madagascar, not always clear, loaded also in relation to the reconciliation law. And I was wondering if you could speak a bit more about your views, the priorities regarding reconciliation, how, between whom, and then also possible entry points for the UN in that sense. Thank you.
Thank you. We have more time for another question. Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon. My name is Sue Ream. I'm with the Presbyterian Church USA. And you had mentioned briefly about the role of civil society in the work, strengthening institutions. And I wonder what that role was and what the future could be for civil society in going forward.
Thank you. Okay, one last one here.
Thank you. My name is Lalaina Rarmwag. I'm based in here working for the mission of Madagascar. I have a few comments. Firstly, I would like to thank Mr. Abdoulaye Bathily for his work in my country. I think as a personal view that the successful crisis resolution in Madagascar was also part of giving legitimacy to all steps of the process. And giving also legitimacy to all individual actors, stakeholders, and the UN through the special envoy was part of this. Now Madagascar is expecting to have the next step then, as Mr. Abdoulaye Bathily said earlier, about the legislatives and the referendum who are upcoming this next month. I would like to know if there is some prospect on the accompanying action through the UN or through your personal activity on this point. Thank you.
Thank you. You mean in the next period dealing with the general election and the referendum, what the UN is doing to
Yes,
accompany
next month
that process.
elections and
Yeah.
the referendum.
Yeah,
Will
thank
be
you.
there some accompanying actions as well as there was before, and what kind of action will be?
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think reconciliation is a sensitive issue, but of course, you would find individuals who are in total denial saying that there is no need for national reconciliation. But there is always a need for national reconciliation, especially in countries which have been torn apart by so many years of political conflict. And I think this reconciliation is not only between or among political actors at national level, but also even locally, because the political situation has implications through the relationship of people siding with one or the other camps or several camps throughout years. This you can see. But also, regionally, for instance, some of the region feel left out throughout the process. When we talk about the South, we talk about the North or the coast, even the highlands. In the city, you can see what unemployment problems and other issues, cultural differences, etc., etc. So all those wounds which have been opened during these years of conflicts can be healed through a dialogue process. But it is not up to us as international partners to say how and when, to what extent that national reconciliation should be done. But there is a need. And I think there is a necessity for what, and the UN system is ready to support this process.
So you're saying they also need to be accompanied by national governance and development initiatives.
Because we were waiting for the end of the legislative elections when the new government will be put in place to engage the government to see in what area most through our dialogue, interactive dialogue with the UN system, where we can best help, not only in terms of national reconciliation, but also how to alleviate poverty. Of course, the government has its own, they have already started implementing their program of infrastructures and other elements of that program. But also at local level, people need to feel the change of government. People need to feel that they are in a new era in terms of government policy, in terms of partners support. So I think this is something which has to be taken into account. Civil society, of course, like in many other countries, civil society has been very weak in Madagascar, but still, it has played an important role in this crisis through different mechanisms. Even through, for instance, the electoral process, thousands, they have recruited thousands and thousands of observers for the elections. Almost all the polling stations, in fact, national electoral observers from civil societies are far more numerous than international observers.
Good,
So, which is very important.
good, good.
Civil society has played an important role in Madagascar. And I think, for instance, one of the areas where the UN and other partners could contribute also is how to strengthen the capacity of civil society organization, women movements, young people, to strengthen their capacity so that they can, along with what the government is doing, speed up the process of national reconciliation and development. We intend, of course, to support Madagascar at this time, because we think our support would not end with presidential elections. Already, for the legislative elections, it is the UN, through the Sachem project for the elections, who has garnered all the funds for the elections. Thanks to that support, the government has been able to hold its promise of legislative elections. There is a small gap of the financing of the elections, as you know, but we think that things are in a position where the elections could be held, at least the legislative elections. As for the referendum, at this point in time, I cannot say much because we don't know, we don't have all the necessary documentation, what are the subject, what are the provisions of the constitution which will be changed, etc. What are even the financing of the campaign and how the campaign for the referendum will be organized, etc. Our only worry is that it would be important to maintain this environment of dialogue among actors, even on constitutional issues. The referendum concerns the fate of the people, the destiny of the country. So it is important to create a dialogue on the issues, a debate on the issue, a peaceful debate on the issues of the constitution, so that both the referendum and the legislative elections will go in a way such as the democratic process in Madagascar will come out consolidated rather than disrupted. We don't need that. So we will try to engage all the stakeholders in this direction.
Thank you very much. So not only we need to consolidate the gains, but to ensure there are no reversals.
Yeah.
And you added another ingredient to all the ingredients of successful, sustainable mediation is the UN system. Yeah. Not only do you have the sub-region and the region, but also the UN system to stay the course. If I were to teach mediation again, I'm going to use Madagascar as a successful way of approaching mediation for sustaining peace. Please join me in thanking Professor Bathily for a wonderful evening. Thank you, sir.
It is really my pleasure
to
have this occasion, really, with my good friend, old friends. We are together, visiting professor at King College in London. So I was happy to be with him here in IPA and really thank IPA for giving this platform.
Thank you.
And I learned a lot about it and the wonderful work you are doing, analysis and reflection. Yeah. So thank you very much.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for joining us.